The Romanian deadlift is an excellent hip hinging movement for strengthening the gluteus maximus and the hamstring muscles. Adding a band to the Romanian deadlift is a great strategy for a few reasons. Number one, it forces you to hinge at the hips correctly. Most people, they just bend forward versus driving their hips backwards when performing any type of deadlift variation. And as you can see with the band, if you pull enough of the slack out of the top of the movement, it actually will pull your hips backwards when you flex, also known as bend your hips, and that way you are doing it within an efficient manner. Another reason the band is strategic is that it increases the difficulty and glute activation at the top of the movement. As the bar path comes closer to the trained joint, so in this case your hips, torque of those trained joints decrease. So less torque means it's not as challenging. Therefore, the band increases torque, meaning it increases the challenge of the movement at the most important part of the movement, which is hip extension, so at the top of the movement. Before we get into how to perform this exercise, let's quickly take some time to talk about your setup. Firstly, the barbell. You want the barbell to be set up at an optimal height, which is typically around the middle of your shins. If you can't lift heavy enough to bring the barbell up to your mid shins, or if your gym doesn't have bumper plates, you're gonna have to get creative here. And you can either increase the starting point height by putting the barbell on some weights, maybe aerobic steps, or even using the squat rack safeties. You don't want the starting height to be directly on the ground, especially if you aren't using bumper plates, as that is not going to put you into an optimal position, and it's going to put a lot of unnecessary pressure on your lower back. So play with each variation to see what's going to work best for you. Next, you want to anchor your band. So you can anchor your band around the J hooks of a squat rack, and you want it to be around the height of your hips when you're standing in an upright position. There are other ways that you can look into when it comes to anchoring your band, such as the bottom of a squat rack, maybe around a pole or around the pole of the squat rack, or even around your feet. So feel free to play with multiple variations to see what's going to work best for you and your setup. Once you've completed your setup, next you want to bring the band around your hips and take a few steps forward to pull the slack out of the band. The barbell should be at your shins, and you want your feet about shoulder width apart. Then you want to hinge your hips to the back of the room and grab the barbell and stand up. This is your starting position. To initiate the movement, slowly glide the barbell down to your thighs and towards your shins, while driving your hips to the back of the room. As you bring the barbell down to your shins, your knee angle is going to change, and it's going to be in a slightly bent position. Once the barbell reaches your shins, then you want to drive your feet into the ground, squeeze your glutes, and stand back up. A good cue is to pretend like you're leg pressing the floor away from you. When you come back up to the top, make sure you're not arching your lower back. You do want to squeeze your glutes at the top, but you want to do so without driving your hips too far forward where it is creating a lower back arch. Lastly, when it comes to your breathing, focus on breathing into your stomach, into your chest, and into your diaphragm on the way down, and don't breathe out until you're about midway back up to the top. If you start breathing out when you are completely hinged over at the bottom just before that transition movement from the bottom going back to the starting position, often what happens is you lose stability, and that can cause lower back pain or even an injury. So to help avoid that, make sure you hold your breath just for a few seconds when you're in that hinged position and start to stand back up, and then you can breathe that air out when you're about midway back up to the starting position. And that's the banded Romanian deadlift.